Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Hold My Drink, where we navigate the news and politics with a chaser of civility. I'm your host, Jen, inviting you to grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and imagine with us how to create a new American identity together. Welcome to this week's Hold My Drink and Counterweight podcast with my co-host, David Bernstein. Today, we have Emmett Gardner with us. He is the first president of Students Unite, which is an organization under Parents Unite and affiliated with FIRE. We know FIRE well. We've our friend Bonnie Snyder there. So, Emmett, I'm looking forward to hearing more about Students Unite and how that got started. But before, I know that you do have a drink of water because you're not allowed to have an alcoholic drink yet.
Right.
But it's in a FIRE bottle.
Yes.
Yes. So you are showing your colors. David, what do you have?
Not Starbucks, so I'm sorry to disappoint. But
Well, okay, you know already that January is dry for me, so I'm keeping it real now. I've got a cherry lime spike seltzer. So the next time David and I do this, I don't know what it's going to be.
try. It's a dry podcast.
Well, not today. Anyways,
'Cause
all right.
I'm on a low carb diet, just so you know. So that means that I'm also not going to be doing alcohol in January.
Okay. All right. Wait. I've got to ask you something first, though. Did you start your low carb diet before the holidays?
I did. I just wanted a little bit of sort of run up credibility for my diet. Like if I start on January 1, it's so cliche. And then you don't, and you're but everybody's on a diet on January 1, and then you actually get off of it 2 weeks. So I wanted to be able to prove myself like 10 days before January 1 that I was going to make some progress. So that's what I've done.
I like that a lot. I have to tell you, I get really as a gym rat myself. When I go to the gym on January 1, I get really angry because I'm like, really, it's just so crowded.
Right.
2 weeks later, you're like, okay,
Right.
yeah, that really.
That would be me showing up to the gym for January 1. Right.
Oh, well, we'll see about my dry January. So, all right, enough about our alcohol and low carb diet, Emmett, things that you don't have to worry about at this point right now as a senior in high school. But you started, or the first president of Students Unite under President. See, I can. This is already. I haven't even had a sip of my drink. Under Parents Unite with FIRE. Tell us a little bit about Students Unite and what you stand for.
Right. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. Students Unite is a network of students who learn the importance of our three principles, which are open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and normalize dissent in K through 12 education. And they work to advocate for those principles through setting up clubs, holding events, and generally just doing it in their classrooms, which is an important aspect of maintaining a culture of disagreement that we want to reaffirm in K through 12 education that we see diminishing a bit in the past few years.
I love that word is a culture of disagreement.
Right.
Yeah, and then you also said something too that I really like: normalize dissent. Can you? I mean, what does that mean to you? Like, because for me personally, I think disagreement is a good thing, but we have gotten to the point where disagreement and dissent is frowned upon. So, can you elaborate a little bit more on what a culture of disagreement looks like to you?
Sure, yeah. So what we try to do is make sure that everyone is comfortable in disagreeing with each other. And that requires a lot of practice and work. You can't just go at it and start disagreeing with your teachers and peers. It requires a lot of deliberation prior to implementation. But um, the idea is to train kids to learn the correct methods to disagree productively, actually contribute to a conversation instead of doing it in a rash way, and then making sure that a disagreement is tolerated and it can flourish in an environment of academic inquiry. So we help kids disagree with their friends if they're in a peer group where it's pretty ideologically homogenous. We help those dissenters, those mi- minorities out, and then also in classrooms as well. Disagreeing with teachers is the next step up. In my eyes, it requires a bit more training, but in implementation, it's very successful.
That's great. How many young people have you guys been able to reach so far? Is it just in its very early stages, or is it at this point you becoming more of a mass movement?
It's in its very early stages. We've amassed a network of around 30 like really committed students who have reached around in the neighborhood of a couple thousand kids through online communities and podcasts and starting clubs and things like that. We have been working with Fire a lot. Fire K through 12 runs Discourse Clubs, and we've been
Mhm.
trying to set those up across the country. And their page has had a few hundred thousand people visit every year or so. So we're building up. It is in its infant stages, but we're trying to gain that momentum.
You find that the students that you've been able to reach so far are ideologically inclined in one direction or the other? Do they tend to be center right or center left, or is it about equal?
It is about equal, and this is something that we're very proud of at Students Unite is maintaining a pretty equal ideologue of sample size of student. Generally, though, people who are turned off by the organization might see it as a conservative or right wing thing, just because of the grounds that Parents Unite has, and different. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is conservative, given that the academia tends to lean left in a lot of ways, and that's a lot of our focus is on that. But we make an effort to make sure that our arguments rely on viewpoint diversity and inclusion rather than subtraction of ideas and shutting down anything uh, that would be considered of the other side. So we actively try to encourage more left-leaning students to join, and they are comfortable in the organization. A lot of times they agree with the ideas that we are trying to prevent from infiltrating the classroom as orthodoxy, but they recognize the importance of an objective education. So they're able to still advocate against that, even though they agree with it.
Emmett, tell us a little bit about, for those listeners who don't know, about the parent organization Parents Unite and how they started and then how it has evolved to include Students Unite.
So Parents Unite was founded, I believe, quite recently by a group of parents who are seriously concerned with the lack of viewpoint diversity in their kids' education. And we've seen the Parents Unite group grow significantly over the past few months, as well as we recently had a conference in Boston, and I believe we're going to have one again in the coming years, hopefully.
Great
But
conference, by the way.
it was excellent.
Yeah, it was.
Mhm. Yeah, they really pulled that one off very nicely. But I got in contact with Parents Unite through Fire. I was working on the Discourse Clubs with them, and they were welcoming of students. They really wanted the student perspective on these issues because a lot of times it is the teachers and the parents talking, and that's the entirety of the conversation basically. So nobody gets the student perspective that much. Everyone, it's almost like they're pawns. So what Parents Unite is trying to do with Students Unite is take a step back and start to include the population that is affected most by the problem that they're seeing.
Mm. If you if you had a student who felt that they were being sort of indoctrinated on some of the issues of the day. I mean, obviously, we talk whether you call it critical race theory or not. Sort of getting a racial essentialist point of view at school. Would you coach them through how to deal with that? How are you preparing students to deal with these conversations that are more often than not being sort of imparted in a single voice, in a single viewpoint?
Well, we always start from the perspective that these voices and these positions have a place in the classroom. It's the method in which they're presented to students that we are
Mhm.
advocating against. So if you disagree with the opinion, that's not enough for me to help you. You have to really have an issue with the way that the school is presenting it to the students. If maybe they're severely weighting the conversation so only the one certain idea gets presented and the other one is just defamed. Maybe they're not fostering enough of a culture of disagreement, so you have to supplement your own dissent into the conversation. That's things that we can help on. We don't provide arguments for people to argue against critical race theory at all, and it's really about maintaining the purpose of education, which is to fill the children with a nuanced understanding of the world's issues. And you can't do that when there's only one voice in the classroom.
So, give an example of, have you come across a situation where you've had to come in as Students Unite and train, counsel, mentor? What did that look like?
Right. So chiefly, our biggest concerns are with helping students um, feel as though they are confident in bringing up other positions. A lot of times they already have these positions, they're articulated in their heads to some degree, but they are not experienced enough to actually bring it up in the classroom. So probably, we've dealt a lot of times with students who are in classrooms that are everyone in the room repeats the same dogma. It's just not fulfilling as a class, and it's honestly quite like disrespectful to the notion of intellectual inquiry. So that's what turns them off, and that's what drives them away from the conversation. So we help them enhance the classroom environment by bringing in those opposing sides. So, for example, there was one girl at this school in Massachusetts who was in this class who that almost every day they would have a discussion about a topical issue. I believe it was like a civics class, and it was just one side being represented in the classroom. Nothing that would be out of the ordinary. Unfortunately, in many of the cases that we deal with, so we helped her develop a sort of way of presenting her ideas. Here's what not to do. Here's what you should do. And over the span of a couple months, I think that the classroom is much more ripe with dissent. She first kind of raised a contrary position to the prevailing notion, and then as we had predicted, other kids started to disagree with the prevailing notion as well. So that made her more comfortable, and now I think the classroom is much more productive. So that was one of our successes, and we're very proud of that.
Um, so, to know how to dissent from a prevailing opinion means that you have to have a sense of what the range of opinions are. So, for example, if you went to a school, you're a high school senior, you're in social studies class or government class, and they discuss Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and that's the only thing you're teaching. For you to be able to ask your teacher to present a more rounded perspective, you'd have to be able to know that John McWhorter just came out with a new book called Woke Racism. Is that part of what you do to equip students to be able to have these conversations?
Absolutely, we make sure that no student brings up nuance until they understand. So they have to understand when the nuance is not being respected. There is a homogeny in the classroom, and their dissent would actually add something to the room, right? So that's something that they have to understand. A lot of times there's a miscalculation in there, and they provide some sort of disagreement when it's not welcome. And the second thing they have to understand is the actual subject matter and how to raise the uh, the notion that would be most productive for the conversation. A lot of times, kids when they first start out, they go on these dramatic anecdotes, and they talk about all these different things. So we make sure that they are focused. We try to promote scholarship, academics. In the sense that we provide books, materials, and recommendations for any kid struggling with any sort of homogeny in their friend groups or otherwise. So, in your example, if a kid was in a classroom and they were teaching how to be an anti-racist, and they came to us, we would provide them books by Thomas Sewell, John McWhorter, people like that. On the other hand, we've had kids come to us who are in right wing friend groups, not necessarily in school, of course, but in friend groups that are only reading John McWhorter, if at all, or just watching Fox or whatever. We would provide them candy or some sort of nuance. We're looking for nuance, not necessarily anything like that. But we're not going to help anyone who's not interested in learning the material first.
One of the things that I've been challenged with is this notion that if you if you try to open up discussion, you're going to also be opening it up for very radical views as well. So one example is an educator in Texas stated that with the new Texas law in place, now means that we have to teach multiple perspectives on whether the Holocaust happened. And that created a huge firestorm, and people said, "See, you're saying that that we shouldn't teach a single view on race and racism, so therefore now you've opened it up to multiple views on the Holocaust." How do you have you gotten that particular concern, and if you have, or how did you deal with it? And if you haven't, how would you deal with it when it inevitably comes your way?
Right. So I strongly believe in the invisible hand of the free marketplace of ideas, and what that main what that prescribes is that in a culture of open inquiry, the strongest beliefs should prevail. And if you are wasting resources on a position that is entirely ridiculous by any modern standard, right? Any objective academic standard, that would be shutting off conversation, a waste of resources, and shouldn't be tolerated. So there's a level of mutual respect and toleration when you're having a conversation with someone. Some topics, of course, are going to be off limit as always, um, but there are constraints and limitations, but tremendous virtues with having a free exchange of ideas. And I do not believe that the radical voices will be amplified in a culture of disagreement. The only thing I believe that the radical voices will be uh, only argued against more productively, basically. So let's say you have this rash opinion and you're bringing it up in a culture of disagreement. You're going to be shut down quite quickly. And in the culture that we provide, you learn how to change your mind with new evidence.
So I've got a question for you. I love this. Again, I like the idea of the culture of disagreement. I think that that's a value that we've really not put enough weight on. One of the things that I've been learning lately that I love, and I guess is we're kind of in the new year. This is something that I'm really working on. Is sometimes when I'm in a discussion, I have to remember it's not a debate, and I'm not there necessarily to win, but to learn. And I feel like so often we get in these discussions and they become heated and they become this zero sum game. You know, you're in it to win it. And when it's set up as a debate, I think your brain automatically is like, you've got to, all of a sudden, even if you came in to the conversation with good intentions, you know, your brain is kind of hard, we're all hardwired, I think, to win. And I think that's one of the things that I think though is missing, and it's been a revelation for me, I'd say, within the past couple of months, of where I've even talked to my son, who is your age, Emmett. We were having a conversation over Christmas, and I said, I had to stop him and say, this is a discussion, I'm not trying to win anything. You know, this is not a debate. And I honestly, just even by saying that, it took the temperature down of the discussion, which was a heated discussion, but a discussion nonetheless. I mean, are those the kind of tools also that you are trying to work with in the school? Because I do feel like disagreement doesn't have to be debate. Disagreement can still be discussion. And you can respect disagreement, you know, and come away and feel like you've learned something, even if you haven't changed your mind.
Exactly. My personal background before I got involved with fire was actually in competitive debate, and I found it just horrendously unproductive. I was disgusted at how much effort the teachers, the administration, and the students, you know, put into an activity that didn't really result in any like intellectual advancement or learning. You didn't really change your mind when you try to, you know, win trophies or go to competitions and compete with other schools. So I found that extremely unproductive, and I became president of the debate club, and I turned it into a discourse club, which is operating pretty much on conversation,
Nice.
respectful disagreement, and we attracted a lot of the kids that were turned off by the elitist high school debate culture, which prevails in a lot of schools. So they were put off by this sport of debate, which a lot of them saw it, and they joined this new. We had a diverse range of opinions. Lots of different people joined, and we had tremendous conversations. And people actually learned to understand each other and how productive disagreement really can be. I think the Boston, we're working with the Boston Globe. We're going to do a story on the club I ran because there was two students who, during the actual debate club, I was friends with them both. They were as ideologically distant as you can imagine, and they could not even cooperate with each other. They were so, you know, disagreed with each other, move on, like whatever. It was awful. And then they both joined the Discourse Club after I changed it, and they're very good friends now. So the Boston Globe is going to do something on that soon, I hope. Um, but that's really what happens. You build friendships, you learn to understand each other. That's what's missing in these schools. And the culture that we promote in schools with the debate clubs and the orthodoxy just amplifies and really limits our ability to get along with each other.
Yeah, I mean, well, that brings up something that I've been waiting to ask you about is how you got into this. So you answered that a little bit with, and I love that. So you turned a debate club into a discourse club. That is awesome. And I know that Fire has discourse clubs as well. Is that right? Are they called discourse clubs within Fire that they help to promote?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I mean, debate. Here's the thing, though. What's so interesting, Emmett, is that debate has been, I mean, it's been a part of our education system forever. And debate is win or lose usually, but it's just the world that we live in now has become so contentious that it's okay, debate is okay, we've forgotten discourse in the process of debate. Anyways, that was my little like soapbox there. Stepping down from that, tell us about like how you got involved in this in the first place. I mean, you're a senior in high school. What drew you to Parents Unite and to Fire and to this passion to turn debate into discourse?
Right. So was always sort of interested in politics and kept up with current events and things like that. But once I started getting into the early years of high school, I started actually, putting more effort into it. I would read books constantly. I had shelves and shelves of these papers and things like that. I started to really get into the weeds of philosophy, economics, politics, things like that. And unprompted by the school, I was pretty much on my own will. And once I started to acquire a nuanced understanding of the issue, I could see where the school was lacking in a lot of ways. So I started to see that the school was not upholding the same level of viewpoint diversity as I would expect, or anyone would expect an educational institution to uphold. So it was kind of a revelation for me. I was a bit disturbed in a lot of ways, and I started to see the effects on my friends and things like that. I wanted to do something about it. So I joined the debate club. I was part of the debate club my whole high school career. I turned that into the discourse club and started to see our methods in our environment work really well with the exact demographic of student that we needed, which was the students that were interested in politics, maybe had their own opinions, but were either ideologues in that respect or couldn't really voice them, weren't comfortable with talking about them with other people. So we had tremendous success in my own high school. And then I reached out to FIRE. It was actually a bit of a hiccup with the school because we tried to set up a middle school chapter of our high school branch because middle school was right next door because we wanted to run a middle school exercise with the kids, help them understand how to disagree with each other, things like that. I thought it would be very productive, especially at that age. They need something like this. Once they go into high school, they might fall into whatever political group that most appeals to them at that moment, and then that's just a snowball. So we wanted to prevent that from happening. We went to the school and they said, no, you can't set up a discourse club because they had already had a social justice club at the school, and that counts as discourse. So that was quite disturbing for us at the moment. And we reached out to FIRE and started to become uh, deattached. We disattached ourselves from that school and got in contact with Parents Unite and started Students Unite from there.
That's interesting that they would regard a social justice club as being the same as a discourse club. I mean, it just
Yeah.
shows that they don't really understand what either are. But I want to push back by the way, a little bit on this idea of debate versus discourse. As Jennifer
Dave.
knows, I'm a fan of debate, but not necessarily the kind of debate that you do in a lot of high schools or colleges, the kind of rehearsed debate, but rather sort of more you know, argumentation, the kind of where two people or three people or whatever are sitting around and they're talking about an issue and they're just going back and forth. And I just had on another podcast Rob Lighton, who is a Brookings Institution scholar. He's written a book on debate-centered education, and he believes that you can teach almost any subject better, including math and science, by setting up debates among students to go back and forth and think through issues. And that teaches you a method of thinking, that critical thinking, that can serve you on any set of subjects and throughout life. And I regard that, by the way, as not different from discourse. It's just a kind of discourse. And I'm wondering if you've thought about that, and if you've thought about how discourse and debate intersect.
Absolutely. One of the key differences I've seen between debate and discourse is debate is more exercise focused and helping you develop the analytics and the machinery behind making arguments and speaking and things like that. And discourse is presenting your own views and trying to have conversations with people. And I do see a clear overlap there. I try to encourage in our exercises that we do. Um, I try to encourage kids not to take their own position as much as they would like to, and really understand why putting ideas in conflict with each other produces an excellent educational environment and educational outcome for them. So there's significant overlap. The part of debate that I want to dispose of is the competitiveness.
Right. It just, I think in some ways it's a bit of a semantics issue because I think we're talking about really two very different kinds of debate. The formal style of debate that you would do in a high school club versus the sort of more freestyle debate that you might do with your friends. And I think actually it's that latter form that needs more attention to because I think that helps us become better thinkers.
All right. So, David, you talk a lot about, you just said something that I think really for me, hit the nail on the head because you talk a lot about debate and through you, I've learned a lot about debate culture and Jewish society and Jewish culture. But I really do think when I hear you talk about debate, I think it really is discourse because it is this culture. Let me go back to what Emmett said. It's a culture of disagreement,
Right.
which
It is.
that is a good thing. It doesn't have to be to disagree, doesn't have to be a debate. I mean, I think debate sets up exactly what Emmett said. Someone has to win,
Right.
versus learning or even disagreeing. I mean, you can disagree without winning. So I do think maybe it is semantics.
Right. Rob Lighton, the guy who I interviewed at Brookings, told me that he was a high school and college debater, very high level. I think he probably was in the Ivies and all that. And he said that in his day, going back a long time ago, probably like 50 years, the debate was not this formal process. It was actually just people arguing over key issues at the time, and it became a more formalistic process later. So that's what he believes needs to be done as an education tool. I completely agree with that, and I don't mean when I say debate, I literally don't even think about that style of debate that many high school and college students are doing. And maybe the calling it discourse makes sense because so many other people do think of it in that way.
They do. They do.
Yeah. And so, wait, David, that's interesting to me. Did he lay out that transition? Like, is there a timeline for when debate became debate as we know it now in that competitive vein?
I think he said about 30 years ago it started to change. And I that's when I was in college, I briefly dabbled in formal debate, and which was really I thought it was okay. We're going to go around and argue like I grew up arguing around the dinner table, and
Mhm.
that's not what it was at all. It was that you get a phrase, and then you have to take positions on it. You prepare speeches, and it's more about speech. And I agree, it's more about winning and not about learning to make effective arguments that help people understand each other and to really force you to think deeply about all points of view and make sure that you become a stronger thinker and a stronger arguer as you go along. And I think
Mhm.
it's a really important skill set.
So on that note, on this culture of disagreement and on these discourse clubs, so obviously what I heard from you, Emmett, was it was your foray into creating the discourse club that then got you in touch with Fire, that then got you in touch with Parents Unite. How is that idea of discourse club? Is it I know you said at the very beginning to David's question that you have about 30 students. But this idea of discourse clubs, how's that going? I mean, is there more than just your school? I mean, I know that Fire also has to, promotes discourse clubs. Where is that right now, going into 2022?
Right. So we set up a discourse club based on our ideas, and then a few months later, we got in touch with Fire, who we didn't even know had discourse clubs. So we were thrilled that they were setting up a network. That network is very much in its infancy right now, and the problem I see is it's extremely hard to get these clubs set up, especially when you're concerning discourse, is because you have to go through the administration first.
Mm.
and the teachers. And I've already had lots of problems trying to convince them the importance of a discourse club, and I imagine that that can be replicated through a lot of places. So Fire has had lots of problems getting these set up, specifically because they go through the administrators who want nothing to do with establishing a club that would, maybe would voice any opinion that might go against their social justice club. So what I see is the avenue is going through the students. So that's part of the reason why I set up Students Unite. And this is one of the club options and resources we have available to all our members is the discourse clubs. We push that on them, making sure that they are setting up these type of clubs in their school, get them excited about repurposing the debate environments that they may already have in their school. So this is the angle that I'm attacking, and I think that could yield some pretty good, fruitful discussions and some significant weight. I do not think it's viable to go through the teachers.
So when you're going through the students, are you primarily targeting those who might be already in a debate club for starting a discourse club?
Oftentimes we are, and part of why that's successful is we're pointing out what could be and what they have, and they can clearly see the stark contrast between them. A lot of times they do not want to get involved with the discourse club because they're already invested in the competitiveness and they've already been to competitions and things like that. But there are many high schools that have debate clubs similar to the one that I had in my high school that are pretty much idle and might do like a debate now and then within themselves or go to a competition once a year, but really want to be part of something meaningful. And this is what we're pushing with the discourse clubs: is you are advancing your own intellectual interests, the idea of a liberal education, and nothing could be more virtuous than that. So this is what we're pushing with that.
Emmett, I know you talked a little bit about your background, how you ended up doing this, but I want to sort of go deeper than that. What about your worldview, your upbringing led you to the point where you would be willing to do something that sort of goes against the grain of the current social moment, where we're told more often than not you should believe a single point of view?
Growing up, I always had that disagreement, gene, I guess, in me to some extent. We always had these debates and disagreements, and I have always found them not only fun, to some degree, but an experience an opportunity to learn and a way to advance my own understanding of the world. And I used to get that at a lot of family gatherings, and instances like that have brought me to the conclusion that having a conflict, like a rich conflict of ideas, is most viable for the advancement of education and should be implemented as much as possible, as you were saying with the Brookings individual.
So David and I say this with love, Emmett. David and I consider ourselves kind of a band of misfits, if you will. We've collected around this band of misfits. Do you think that like, are you a normal high schooler? Or, I mean, or is this like, are you kind of like us where you're a misfit and you're like, yeah, that drove you to go outside of the norm, if you will? Because I don't think, from what you're telling me, that you are normal. I use scare quotes, normal. I don't want to label you as I labeled David and I because we already labeled ourselves as misfits. But I mean, do you find a lot of other students your age who are like, yeah, let's do this discourse thing?
I do think that I am more of a misfit. So you are welcome to refer to me as that. But I think that there is potential. I'm not pessimistic about the student body in advancing discourse, the ideas of discourse. What they need is a student who is already familiar with the reasons behind discourse and viewpoint diversity and culture and normalized dissent, um, to persuade them and plant that seed in their heads, and then it will flourish. This is what happened to me to some extent with um, a few individuals I had who influenced me, but I've noticed it throughout my own high school. I start to tell kids what I'm doing, and start to provide nuance in classrooms, like on a on the ground level, like as it's happening during class discussions, and they start to realize dissent, how important dissent is, and they start to realize that maybe I should be doing more of this disagreement. This conflict of ideas will actually help me, even if I don't agree with what the people are saying. And so I do believe that the potential is there, but the problem is the educational contemporary educational environment and culture is not letting that get too much traction as is. So they need student leaders on that front.
Well, you're about ready to go to university. You're a senior. So we've seen that universities don't really provide that environment lately either. So what are your concerns in heading to university? If you're heading to university, I haven't asked that yet. And if you are, do you plan on carrying on this idea of creating discourse clubs in wherever you plan on going?
I do, and I do plan on going to university, and I look forward to attempting to provide discourse clubs, discourse environments, and spreading this idea that I had. I do want to make sure that the high school Students Unite discourse clubs do not die with me as I go to college. So I'll probably remain active in that department. But to address your concern before, that is something that I've been thinking about, is how intolerant a lot of universities are, in many people's eyes, to viewpoint diversity. But overall, I'm optimistic. I see that there is a lot of potential, and the students are looking for new ideas, looking for different clubs to join. So I'm looking forward to it.
Really an important thing you're doing. And I just, you say I'm not going to let this go yet because um, this is the sort of idea that you're optimistic. I mean, let me just make the case. We're about like healthy disagreement here, right? So let me just make the case for pessimism for a second. That an ideology. Well, you have sort of populist ideologies on the right that have taken hold and sort of gotten the right off of the straight and narrow, and you have sort of illiberal ideologies on the left that have really taken hold, and those ideologies are now becoming rapidly institutionalized. You're seeing them take hold in schools, as you know better than we do. You see a generation your age that goes to especially more elite colleges, and they've only really heard one side of these debates. I mean, most of them aren't subjected to discourse. So I'm sure that you're coming across a self-selected group of young people who are willing to go back to the drawing board and open up the conversation. But what makes you think that that's scalable? What makes you think that that can be done on a large scale?
Well, particularly in high schools, kids are not as marinated in the ideology yet. So they're more willing to
Mhm.
open up their heads to more ideas. It's not a specific group of people. We've done this replicated it on many schools, and have achieved pretty much the same outcome. I am concerned more with college age kids, because they are more marinated in the illiberal ideas of that have entrenched the institutions. But the way I see it, and what makes me more optimistic is more and more colleges are adopting the Chicago Statement, for example, maintaining viewpoint diversity. If a school is wants to remain a school, in any respect, an educational institution, they cannot institutionalize anything that would actually put any dissenters at risk. And I say this with significant caution because I know that a lot of schools have had waves of radical students who kind of influence the curriculum and the teachers to some extent. But generally, though, I believe that um, first of all, the high school student population is a rich deposit of students that if we can tap into them now and start to educate them on what a school actually should be, they can employ that in college. As for the institutions, I believe that there are organizations like FIRE and the Mill Center, for example, is another recently founded organization who are actively working on this and making sure that this culture is not doesn't diminish our schools, because that's something we need to conserve. So we can't let these schools not become educational anymore, and I don't think that'll happen. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen, but I think that's pretty long, far off, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm excited that, yeah, to hear your point of view and to hear that optimism. So, final question then for you, Emmett. What do you plan on studying?
In school,
Hmm.
I am going to most likely go into economics as a
Good.
major. Probably do a minor in philosophy, something like that.
No, I would have, yeah, with you mentioning philosophy, I was gonna guess philosophy myself, but economics, okay. It's been such a pleasure. You give me hope.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Emmett.
Nice to meet you, Emmett.
Nice to meet you as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hold My Drink. Like or subscribe to the show and check out the show notes for links to source material and to our website, where you can find what each of us is reading every week, different news with different views. If you have a topic that you would like us to explore, drop us a line. And join us next week as we say, Hold My Drink, and the conversation gets real.